In the short story The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe, the author shows what a descent into a deranged state is, as well as what madness is. Poe accomplishes this by gradually demonstrating the narrator's wrongdoings and how they become more and more sinful, shedding light on his psychopathic behaviors as the tale advances, and displaying the narrator's delirious rationale to justify his actions and thoughts. The story establishes right from the second paragraph the affection for animals that the narrator had since infancy, saying how he never was so happy as when feeding and caressing them, and that animals were one of his principal sources of pleasure. However, his kind identity slowly disappears. Indeed, the narrator develops a pattern of violence with alcohol, revealing his innate traits and becoming madder in the process. He explicitly says that he has issues with fiend intemperance, and that he experienced a radical alteration for the worse. This substance prompts the protagonist to commit his first sin, inflicting harm on his wife and pets. At length, he even offered her personal violence, and that the pets were made to feel the change in his disposition. He not only neglected, but ill-used them. He even harms his most beloved cat Pluto by deliberately cutting one of its eyes from the socket. Later, the narrator slips a noose about its neck and hangs it to the limb of a tree, effectively killing the creature, a greater act of evil than the previous ones. His next sin occurs with his second cat, who he found in a pub. After adopting the animal, the narrator soon realizes his malice, not knowing how or why, but that its evident fondness rather disgusted and annoyed him. By slow degrees, these feelings of disgust and annoyance rose into the bitterness of hatred, resulting in further alcohol consumption. Alas, he cannot endure it anymore and drunkenly aims a blow at the animal with an axe. His slaughter attempt fails because the blow was arrested by the hand of his wife, leading the narrator to bury the axe in her brain, where he commits the greatest of crimes, killing another person. These instances of the narrator's sinful actions are one of the depictions of his madness, going from loving his pets to homicide. The events of the story display more and more of the narrator's psychopathic behaviors and definitive changes in his emotion, or lack thereof. According to Merriam-Webster, a psychopath is a person having an egocentric and antisocial personality, marked by a lack of remorse for one's actions, an absence of empathy for others, and often criminal tendencies. Such traits, though subtle, can be seen throughout the story. Right from the beginning of his tale, he recounts his relationship with his wife, saying how he suffered himself to use intemperate language to his wife. At length, he even offered her personal violence, which entails his criminal tendencies due to the domestic violence and antisocial personality because of his incompetence at proper communication. His psychopathic traits come in full display when he cuts off one of Pluto's eyes. He describes his feelings as a sentiment half of horror, half of remorse, but it was at best a feeble and equivocal feeling, and the soul remained untouched. While his sentiments of horror and remorse are normal, his feeble and equivocal reactions for them are not what one would expect a normal person to experience after gouging the eyes of their pet, much less one that he adored. The narrator also notes that his soul remained untouched, suggesting that deep down he is in fact completely unaffected by the event. Moreover, his rationalization to hang Pluto is to violate that which is law, merely because we understand it to be such, and to do wrong for the wrong's sake only. He recognizes that his feelings and impulses are wrong, but still acts upon them, whereas a normal person would employ some sense of self-control to stop themselves. Accordingly, he is of cool blood during the event, which shows once again that he does not have any remorse for the cat's execution. Furthermore, he is completely indifferent when he murders his wife, saying, "This hideous murder accomplished, I set myself forthwith, and with entire deliberation, to the task of concealing the body." He does not for a second grieve for her death and immediately plans to hide the corpse, presenting concern only for himself. Additionally, it is relevant to note that the narrator acknowledges the murder as a murder and not an accident, suggesting that he consciously recognizes he did something wrong, but does not carry any concern whatsoever. When he does successfully hide the body, he praises himself triumphantly, saying, "Here at least, then, my labor has not been in vain," as if it was a piece of art he was proud of. He completely accepts the fact that a corpse is behind that wall, because he does not suffer from the emotions of guilt and regret. That same night, the narrator soundly and tranquilly slept, slept even with the burden of murder upon his soul, a testament to his lack of guilt. Eventually, when the police comes and searches his house, his arrogance and cockiness leads him to tell the officers that these walls are solidly put together, essentially mocking them, knowing a corpse is behind it, still expressing nothing close to regret or remorse. Rather, his egocentricity and lack of self-control were in full display. Finally, in the very beginning of the short story, the narrator repents for his actions
claiming these events have terrified, have tortured, have destroyed him, an admission for the change in his behavior and psyche. The particular thing to note is the way the narrator tells the story. Indeed, he puts much more focus on the wrongdoings done to his pets, while he should focus on his much larger crimes of domestic abuse and murder, another sign that proves his lack of conventional views on crimes and justice. The psychopathic behaviors and actions of the narrator throughout the story shows the man's madness and how it drives his thoughts and actions. Throughout the story, the narrator regularly justifies his actions and thoughts, which get more and more deranged, expressing the narrator's madness. He justifies beating his pets, blaming it on alcohol, affirming that his disease grew upon him. For what disease is like alcohol? At no time does he blame himself, the one who drank and got intoxicated. Afterwards, when he wants to gouge out Pluto's eye, he explains his situation as the fury of a demon instantly possessed him, effectively shifting the fault to a demon and not himself. Then, when the narrator hangs Pluto, he blames his action on a spirit of perverseness, describing it as one of the primitive impulses of the human heart, ultimately not taking accountability. Later, when the narrator adopts a new cat, an immediate dislike towards the creature forms within him, specifying it as a brute beast, even though the pet has shown nothing but affection, furthering the idea of his delusions. Later, he justifies his hatred and dread by illustrating the cat's actions. The creature left me no moment alone, and in the latter I started hourly from dreams of unutterable fear to find the hot breath of the thing upon my face, and its vast weight, an incarnate nightmare that I had no power to shake off, incumbent internally upon my heart. This passage essentially describes normal behaviors of a pet that loves its owner, hanging around and sleeping next to them. His justification in this passage is anything but rationality. Afterwards, when the narrator commits murder on his wife, he quivered not in a muscle. His heart beat calmly as that of one who slumbers in innocence, indicating that he truthfully believes that he is innocent, yet another instance of the man's insanity. Later, when the wall collapses, he sees the cat and describes it as the hideous beast whose craft has seduced him into murder, yet again refusing to take responsibility, instead blaming the animal for causing and revealing the murder. Finally, when he atones for his actions and thoughts in the beginning of the story, he details the events as nothing more than an ordinary succession of very natural causes and effects, justifying that everything that happened was inevitable or something out of his control. These instances where the narrator tries relentlessly to justify his actions fall into lunacy and can explain the narrator's downward spiral into madness. The short story characterizes what an individual experiences when going through their own madness. Poe portrays this by revealing one by one the narrator's sins, illustrating the gradual psychopathic behaviors of the narrator and representing the latter's delusion and lack of awareness. This story does not shy from its matters of gore and psychology, wherein the display of a man's madness is shown.